Greetings and compliments of the new season from the team at Zimbabwe Human Rights Monitors platform. This is your show Into Zimbabwe, and I'm your host Karen Manzera alongside
Liam Takura Kanenga.
And this is our first episode of Election Watch, where we'll be looking at human rights and human rights violations amid the 2023 elections, as well as ahead the 2022 by-elections. Liam.
So yes, Karen, basically we'll be analyzing and assessing the civic and political space in Zimbabwe ahead of the by-elections, those slated for 26 March, as well as the 2023 general elections. So our analysis will be deduced down to: one, how are human rights being promoted, defended, the conduct of government and the ruling party towards opposition parties, civil society, as well as activists ahead of the elections, as well as also, again, strictly monitoring cases of violence ahead of the election, as well as the technical issues that surround ballot politics, the government bureaucracy, and many other interrelated issues.
So it's about 40 to 50 days into 2022. What are some of the human rights violations? What are some of the highlights that we've seen on the human rights scenes in Zimbabwe?
So, Karen, basically what we are going to look at is deducing 2022, the human rights situation in Zimbabwe in 2022 in the first 30 days, particularly the first 30 days. We're going to look at one, the year began with a very scandalous human rights violation. You saw the repression and unlawful detention of ATU's teachers demonstrating at NASA building. In fact, they were not demonstrating, but they were just gathered at NASA building, awaiting the outcome of the NJC, the National Negotiation, Council meeting that was happening at NASA between the government and public sector civil servants. So now, already, the state responded by activating riot police, anti-riot police, to beat the gathered teachers, arrest them, and they were detained for 6 days. In fact, we were detained for 6 days. Firstly at Harare Central, then later on to Harare Remand, and then in the last eve of the days, Harare Central Prison as well. So already the state has shown to have a penchant of repression and using violence and excessive force in order to suppress any form of gathering. So the civic space already has started from a note where it is being closed. And we have already a looming private voluntary organizations bill that seeks to entirely cripple the function of civil society because...
And the space continue to shrink.
Exactly. The government is becoming more intrusive and more repressive by the day. Then we also look at the conduct of the ruling party now. Because right now as we speak, there's an ongoing teacher strike over salaries. And remember, the right to a salary or a fair basic wage, living wage, in fact, is a right granted under Section 65 of the Constitution. And the right to even petition and strike or to participate in in collective job action is also given in 59 as well as in 65 again. So now already you see the ruling party responding in a way that politicizes everything, because they're calling it an opposition opportunist agenda, or they call it an aid of regime change. But before we talk about whether regime change is bad or not, let's talk about everything being politicized. The same thing was done with ZCTU actions in the previous years by Robert Mugabe. We now have the teachers, especially the continued targets on the Amalgamated Raw Teachers Union and the Progressive Teachers Union. It keeps on happening. There is even one of the teachers that have said they've been suspended from work without pay. And then already you've seen the government also again suspending these teachers en masse. They don't even know the number of teachers they've suspended. But they just declared a suspension.
On all teachers.
Exactly. And then we are also talking about, it's a right to strike.
It is.
Right? It is also a right to demand accountability. It's also a right to get a good working wage, so that at least there is motivation to give quality education. So the government responds not just in an arbitrary way, but it's responding in a manner that is also unlawful, because as we speak, Karen, I even tweeted this, and then I said, as I type, but now in this case, as we speak, Karen, there is no law whatsoever in Zimbabwe that gives the minister alone, and let alone the ministry, power to suspend anyone from the job or to even give a blanket suspension. Then secondly, that is supposed to be the work of the Public Service Commission, but also the PSC itself has no power to do that. There is no law that supports it. So the suspension of teachers is illegal, unlawful, and a violation of their rights as prescribed under Section 65 to collective job action and a good, fair, basic working wage. So already, as we have started, we've had issues around labor justice. We have also issues around social and economic justice, because when you talk about salaries, we're also talking about the living, the standard cost of living, which has risen to nearly an equivalent of $250 for a family of 5. And already teachers are earning close to about 100 to 150 US dollars. That's $100 less. And the consumption index rate is pegged at 87% of the people in Zimbabwe living below $1 a day.
So you're talking about all these economic violations, social human rights violations,
Yes.
and a lot has also been happening on the political spectrum.
Yes.
We look at currently ZEC introduced, there's a blitz, a voter registration
Yes.
blitz that is ongoing around the country. And so are there any political violations that we are noting on the scenes?
Well, yes, Karen, 7 political human rights violations. I think they are a daily point of conversation in Zimbabwean governance issues. For example, the voter registration blitz comes ahead of a national registration crisis in terms of getting IDs and passports. And then I heard, like, right now there is the introduction of an e-passport, which costs approximately $120. And then also, again, we have people that had applied for passports before 2020, let's say 2019. And those passports, some of them are delayed coming out because it had been said that, one, there was no material. And then we had a lockdown that had all government offices closed, except for those in the essential service sector. So already there was a delay, there is a backlog. And then now we have an e-passport system that is even more expensive. Because remember, that passport was costing, the paper passport costed about $53, or yeah, roughly that, 53 US dollars. But now we're going for 120. And already under the state of the economy right now, if very few people could manage to get passports when they were still cheaper, what of now when they are costing 120? And it's an adaptation to technology.
And not even speaking of passports, the national IDs themselves. I remember during year end, they had to close voter registration because they said there was no material. They said that Registrar General was saying they didn't have material to process IDs. And I remember they only opened for people to get IDs for those who wanted to sit for examinations.
Exactly.
So what does that speak to voters and voter registration? Is it not maybe a systematic way of discouraging young people to vote? Because let's look at this. How many virgin voters do we have that need to get IDs? How many people since 2018 to 2022 right now have turned 18 and still need to get their documents? But this is what we have.
The first thing we're going to talk about is it's a violation of one's right to national identity. Remember, for one to be proven a citizen, they need identity, and identity records in the form of a national ID certificate are the first primary evidence that one proves to be a citizen, and then it's needed for one to register to vote. So whenever they open a blitz, because a blitz, it's more of like fast track, short term, right? And already they are opening another a national ID registry blitz again there. So these two things are happening concurrently. And remember, the long-standing bureaucracy of doing these things, it takes long to acquire an ID. So it means that it's voter suppression on its own, because when a virgin voter goes to collect an ID, they might go and last for maybe 3 to 4 days, a day or two. And then when they go back to try and register again, there's a long queue again. Maybe they might fail to register today. So in all, processes that are supposed to last maybe 2 days are taking maybe a week of one's life. And remember, most of these virgin voters are students, young workers, right? And there are also young women that are burdened already with unpaid care work in their houses. So there's a lot of socio-economic and political contradictions that impose it. And it becomes a voter suppression mechanism. So to really directly respond to that question, is vote rigging already happening? Yes, because situations are already happening that make it unfair, right? So in the end, that is how an election is rigged, and that is how the people's right to vote is violated at first stages.
Okay, so now that you're mentioning election rigging, does that mean election rigging does not only happen during the ballot process?
Yeah,
enlighten me there.
yeah, of course. There are many ways of rigging an election. There is a book actually titled "How to Rig an Election." The first stage is what we've talked about: voter suppression. And then the second thing is repression. Then we have ballot stuffing, we have gerrymandering. But then when we are to talk about voter suppression, you just create situations and phenomena that just frustrate voters. Already the process of acquiring IDs, passports are also important because they're biometric, they're useful in voter registration. And then also going to register to vote, the long queues, right? It just means it will frustrate, especially the virgin voter, right? Because remember, there's a polling station in Kwadzana where people wanted to confirm their details in the voters' roll. And ZEC officials ended up saying, we are not going to accept those that want to confirm their voter registration details, but we want those that have came to register to vote. But it's a right, transparency and accountability. These things we're entitled to.
Not everyone has access to confirm online.
So already, you see, they're imposing an economic challenge to suppress voters. Because once one person fails to get the chance to confirm their details, they might go and find themselves missing in the voters' roll. Just like what we had in 2018, we had almost about 4,000 voters being turned away because their names were not in the voters' roll. And that's how an election starts being rigged.
And speaking of that, recently ZEC has been questioned about some of the statistics that they put out there.
Yeah, when it comes to now statistical inconsistencies, ZEC and Zimstats are champions. And you know, it's a violation of our right to access to information, because when we access information, we need accurate and factual information. And already ZEC says that they registered less than 3,000 voters, right? And then civil society organizations, for example, Project Vote 263, say that no, we registered more than 1,000. So are you saying we registered half of the total contribution? And then there's already another news article, is it in Blair Metro, where it said Blair registered, I think, one voter registration. That was towards the end of 2021, I mean. In 1 month, 30 days to register only one person. Well, there are questions to ask about what happened. Already we've spoken about issues to do with voter suppression and stuff. So already the voter suppression is discouraging the total number of people to come and register to vote. Then the display of inconsistent data itself is another way that is disturbing everything. Why? Because we have a delimitation process coming ahead. And this delimitation process will be shambolic on the basis that it will be based on incredible data, incredible information. So it means that it's, you know, everything will be a lie. Nothing will be true. And remember, these delimitation processes affect mostly urban constituencies. Urban constituencies which are opposition strongholds. So you see now how it affects the democratic balance ahead of the by-elections, ahead of even the 2023 general elections, especially the presidential elections. So in and of itself, that is a way that elections are being rigged, and the right to free, fair, regular, credible elections itself is being flaunted judiciously by, it's very sad, by government officials, and at the hand of what? The ruling party. Because the ruling party seeks to be the biggest beneficiary of the outcome. Because these are in areas where it fares the weakest, where the process is being incredible. So already, it's a cause for concern. So one, ZEC has to be indicted to give us credible information. But then also, we have the problem with Zimstats. The inconsistencies in the total population of people, as well as the inconsistencies in trying to show us how many people do we have that are of voting age, or voter registration age, right? How many people have reached the legal age, like those that are now within the blanket of the Legal Age Majority Act? How many people are there? ZEC hasn't really given us such information. Of course, yes, we have a census coming up, but the inconsistency,
it's already ongoing.
Exactly, because at some point we were told that there are 16 million people. At some point we were told that there are 13. So we are not being told of the population morbidity, the doubling, you know, the increases. We don't have that kind of analysis. So already, ZEC, ZHRMP, and Zimstats, they take advantage of that situation. Then they create a shambolic process. Then so now the center of our outcry becomes the systemic or the systematic problems that this election has. So already, as we're going into 2023, we've started on a very dangerous note.
So the country is now in election mode. We are about 5 weeks to by-elections.
Yes.
Are there issues that we can note already, probably from the generality of Zimbabweans? Is there political violence? And as well from the government and all the stakeholders, civic society, political parties in the country?
Yeah, ahead of these by-elections, Zimbabwe is in a state of perpetual election mode. I don't know why us. You know, we are always in that state where everyone is looking at elections. Remember we had COVID-19 induced lockdown since the year 2020. And at that time, political gatherings were banned, as it may be said. But then one thing that was unfair to note was the ruling party was actually gathering. Remember those chaotic primary elections they had in 2020, and then they got cancelled. You see, and they delayed by-elections. By-elections were due in 2020, but then we're now getting them 1 year. In fact, not less than 11 months ahead of the next election. So already that's a violation itself, because it will be a cost, especially on opposition parties. They don't have access to state funding, and they don't have as much funding as a governing party has, right? And then also, again, it demobilizes people, especially after loss of victory. There is voter fatigue, right? And then already the environment is beginning to tense up, because, you know, these are highly contested elections where we're going to address legitimacy issues in the MDC split. There's the Thokozani Kupe split, the Monzora, then the Chamisa's Triple C formation now. And the Chamisa Triple C formation, being the most visible opposition outfit at the moment, is already facing repression. We saw Emmanuel Zela's Gumbo, Erasmus Nyandoro, Prince Mtebuga being beaten for wearing yellow regalia. You see, so that's repression happening ahead of elections. And what does it do? It puts a system of harvest of fear. It intimidates citizens from associating with opposition. And then we now go on to the car rally in Kwekwe Central Constituency, where Judith Tobayo's campaign team was disrupted by ZHRMP, and they were told that there is actually, like it was published by Pindula, a news feed, where they said that the opposition was not allowed to hold campaigning activities because the violation of COVID-19 violations. But today as we speak, the president of Zimbabwe, who happens to be the president of ZANU-PF, is convening a rally in Epworth to launch their roadmap to by-elections. So there are a lot of irregularities happening, human rights violations happening, especially the right to freedom of assembly, right? And they become a problem of note, and they start to give us a lot of, they raise a lot of eyebrows as we look into by-elections, because if it happens in these stages, what will happen in the actual 2023 elections? So what does it mean? But then also, what is there to fear? What is there to fear? What is it that the ruling party fears? And what they fear is mass, there's what we call the bulge theory, or some would call it, usually people call it the youth bulge theory, where we look at the majority of Zimbabwean citizens are people aged 18 to 35. And these are people of voter age, and these are active. This is the active population. These people have been frustrated by the economic recession of 2020 due to COVID-19 lockdowns, the informal sector being frustrated by closure, inflation rates have gone high.
By government policies.
Policies, labor justice issues already, salaries. At first it was the nurses, now it's the teachers. And then I heard mining sector workers also. And then council workers also again are also raising the same issues. So already there is a boiling point that might mobilize a revolution against the government. And so the government is trying by all means to contain it or to repress it. And so hence all these human rights violations are occurring in the country. And ahead of the by-elections itself, it makes it biases everything in favor of the ruling party and against any opposition party. I haven't heard of any violations of, except for COSVA. I've forgotten what the abbreviation means. Their leaders were also arrested around between the 12th and the 17th of January. But as for other political parties, I haven't heard of any forms of repression yet so far. So the issue also comes to, is this kind of repression targeted to a certain political outfit? And why that political outfit? Because remember, Nelson Chamisa was the runner-up in the 2018 general elections. And already, remember, there was a case, there was a dispute of the elections as well. They went to the Concord, they challenged the issue, and when the rest was history. So already there is an unending dispute which is being carried over into the next election. And much of it owes to poor dispute resolution mechanisms by Zimbabwean political institutions. There could have been dialogue, but we haven't had dialogue. And when we talk about dialogue, we're not talking about just negotiation between politicians, but we're talking about negotiations to address the impending national stalemate, right? And what are the conditions to have dialogue? Because already there's Pollard, but Pollard does not suffice to be dialogue. It's just a convening of politicians to come together and then they discuss. Because
So, Liam, we can go on and on and on talking about, you know, everything that is wrong in the country. Is there hope for democracy? Is there hope for an even playing field in the 2023 elections? Already the government came up with the PVO bill, already trying to suppress and to shrink civic space, yet the civic society plays an important role even during elections as the voice of the people, to try and push for democracy, to try and push against human rights violations. So with everything going on and all the systematic ways that the government are putting in place to suppress and to cause voter apathy, is there hope in the 2023 elections?
Oh, yes,
not hope for change, obviously, but hope that probably there's going to be an even playing field, and there's the election result is going to be fair.
Yeah, there is hope that we can have credible elections. There is hope that we can have electoral reforms. But now, this is where we do an institutional introspection. Yes, we've managed to know what the ruling party and the government, along with the state, are doing to create an uneven playing field. But what does opposition have to do? The opposition now has to go back and do thorough voter education, thorough voter mobilization, thorough training of polling agents and observers such that they monitor, right? Then civil society has to equally give complementary effects, and all pro-democracy movements or people in the pro-democracy movement in Zimbabwe have to start going down on the ground, and they have to be thorough and technical in terms of mobilization, in terms of setting up systems, warning systems, in terms of making assessments, right? And exposing injustices where they see them. Because already, I like what individuals like Freeman Chari are doing. They were closely monitoring the voter registration blitz, and they already exposed that in Kwekwe, there was a person who registered with #1 Central Business District.
There was also #18 Hatfield Harare.
Exactly, of which those addresses don't exist. So already they're saying these people should be arrested. So now, what's the next strategy after exposing that? Strategic litigation. Approach the courts to pressure ZEC to have those people prosecuted and to fix irregularities. So already it's a matter now of going down on the ground and getting technical. It's no longer about just being, all informed by theory and taking top of the scale approach. It's now also getting deep and exposing these issues, but also coming up with countermeasures, right? As well as to also, like I told you, polling agent training, observer training, as well as voter education, proper information system and gathering initiatives, so that, for example, citizen journalism, so that we keep everything under check and to maintain transparency.
True that.
So there is hope, but it's a matter of putting in the work.
So there is hope that Zimbabwe can indeed have credible and fair elections, according to Liam Yetakura Kanenga.